Over here, stranger.
I don't know about you, but following strange men around corners is one of my favourite pastimes. Even if they're obviously hiding concealed weapons and wearing masks to hide their identity, these gigantic red flags have never deterred the RE4 fanbase. Our intuition is on another level. Of course, this man is anything but a stranger. He's the most loved, most iconic, and most mysterious character to ever appear in a horror game, representing the physical embodiment of capitalism. His continuous scams and repetitive dialogue only add to his longevity and charm. He may seem like a normal arms dealer at first glance, but his polarizing presence and minimal connection to the game's story has raised many questions, age-old questions spanning across 20 years at this point. And while many have theorized and tried to answer many of these, they remain just as prominent as ever, and it will stay this way for so much longer. Just like Dr. Salvador, I wanted to delve further into his backstory, starting from the very beginning. As a character, the merchant is both very straightforward and elaborate, wearing a purple mask, a tarnished and stained trench coat that doubles as a gun vendor, and an equally aged backpack that he doesn't ever open in the game. I've always believed that he uses the backpack to store the treasure maps and attaché cases, to separate them from the metallic hoard of weapons that could easily tear into fabric. Encountered numerous times throughout the game, he's always a few steps ahead of Leon, showing up in strange locations that make little to no sense. He will come back from the grave just to stare you down a few meters from the murder scene, but will graciously accept your business and treat you like nothing ever happened. He really is an amazing person, but everything I've just explained was 99% of his entity. Other than that, he's a blank slate, choosing to live vicariously through the game itself and having little nuance beyond that. Honestly, the more I think about the merchant, the more I realise how scary he really is. A very charming and nice man on the surface, but there's an underlying atmosphere that's uncanny, if that makes sense. I think the amount of correlations between him and Los Illuminatos definitely add to this. His potential relation to Lewis, among other things that we wouldn't ever notice until we fall into the rabbit hole. Here we are at the lake, my favourite area in the game. A tranquilizing setting to just sit in the boat and take in the rain. I can imagine being here in real life is that immersive. No wonder I've made 50 videos on it. It's also no surprise that the merchant calls this place home, or at least the closest thing to it. The bars separating us from his small home are removed after defeating Del Lago, and it's at this point where the alluring blue flames indicate that we're free to head inside. A little dilapidated, but cozy nonetheless. Being the merchant's permanent residence, his largest assortment of weapons are on display here, most of which we cannot buy, and even Leon questions how on earth he even got them in the first place. We'll get to that very soon. By climbing on the roof, we can actually jump to the other side of the counter to see his bedroom up close. This may look familiar already. It's where he presents the bonus weapons in New Game Plus. The bedside table with the bananas and the bottle of wine are more visible now, but more difficult to notice from the front. His bed is disgustingly damp and stained also. He doesn't even have a blanket. I like to think that his trench coat and never-ending candles are enough to keep him warm in the winter. As far as merchant locations go, this one is the most important. After a long day of scamming American secret agents, he always comes here to sleep. He's just a normal man at the end of the day, and with that, we have at least something to work with. The other outstanding locations are the shooting ranges, an addicting minigame to play and relax, detached from the stressful main game, and the only place where you can never die. It's also the only place where the merchant does show up in adjacent rooms, making you question the secret passage he used to travel 10 meters in a fraction of a second, as well as a few hidden secrets that could help us in the investigation. The letter Target Practice is one of 2 letters in the game that's written by the merchant, but there's nothing really of interest here. There's a hidden high score system. If you check the bulletin board, there's a suspicious black bag next to him. I wonder what this could be. Most importantly of all though, there is a hidden small dialogue where Leon speaks his one and only sentence about the merchant. Surprising that he never utters a word in the other 2 cutscenes, but here it is. It may not be much in terms of lore relevance. The shooting range in general doesn't offer much depth into the merchant's character, but it's there. With an analysis out the way, I think it's about time we got to some theories. starting with the most popular and ending with a conclusion as always.
Hey, wake up. Crawl out of one hole and into another.
The Lewis relation is by far the most favourite theory that has ever arisen from an RE game. First proposed many years ago, the reasons for this are as meritable as the theory itself. Brought to light are the merchant's probable connections to Los Illuminatos, evident by one of Sadler's letters, as well as one very disturbing feature about his appearance, a detail that's only distinguishable at night: his eyes. The merchant is infected with Las Plagas. Whether or not he's really on Leon's side, we cannot be sure. I've talked about this before, but the merchant is immune to Sadler's call, and isn't under commitment by the events of RE4, unlike the villagers for example. It makes sense why he's isolated himself from the rest of the village population. Sarah and the Third Party is a letter found in 2-2, in detail addressing Lewis's search, Ada's involvement, with an extremely important few sentences regarding another unidentified person, Lewis's grandfather, an entity of whom the merchant shares many similarities with. Firstly, the mention of secret passages that are used at a comical extent by the merchant throughout the game to conveniently cross paths with Leon. The second location where you meet him is literally declared a secret passage by Hunnigan in this radio call.
It's Leon. Sorry I couldn't get in touch sooner, but I was a bit tied up.
You're okay, right?
I'm fine. There was a male civilian held captive. According to him, Ashley's in a church somewhere.
What happened to him?
He managed to escape.
Do you have a fix on the location of that church?
No, but apparently there's a secret passage in the village that leads there. I'm heading back to the village.
How could this letter not be talking about the merchant? The anonymous letter also correlates perfectly with this, detailing knowledge of the secret passage under the waterfall. So if we were to assume the merchant wrote the anonymous letter, which I think he did, this is more evidence to connect this theory. Also, Lewis's grandfather is supposedly dead, or Sadler seems to think so based off this evidence. This suddenly makes his mask extremely important, if it really was an attempt to hide his identity. But why else would he be wearing this 24/7? Why else would he choose to hide out in this cave? Lewis and the merchant also share something in common. They're both affiliated with Los Illuminados, but are secretly working against Sadler. The merchant could have had an influence over Lewis as a child, teaching him about the dangers of the cult and to keep his best interests at heart. They both chose to work independently or against the will of Sadler, and one of them paid the price for it in the end. Speaking of which, Lewis's death doesn't seem to faze the merchant at all. If Lewis was his grandson, surely he would have wanted revenge on Sadler for killing him, maybe even teaming up with Leon to get the job done. He definitely had the firepower to do this. The evidence against this theory is short but concrete. If the merchant really is Spanish and related to Lewis, he wouldn't have the accent that he does.
Stranger? What you need that for? Going hunting an elephant? A wise choice, mate. Its ammo will penetrate just about anything.
He's clearly from an English-speaking country, and it's his first language, most likely British. Capcom have since over-exaggerated his voice in the remake, making it a lot easier to recognise. Also, Lewis grew up in the village while they were still an isolationist society, before Los Illuminados had anything to do with it. His grandfather in question lived here also, using the region for hunting and creating these secret passages that the merchant would go on to exploit as he became an experienced survivor. His granddad would have never travelled abroad, but relics of his past can still be captured in the end credits. He could be one of these villagers. I find this whole theory to be mostly based on speculation, and the small amount of info regarding Lewis's actual grandfather have little relevance in relation to the merchant, unfortunately. Regardless, I never discredit ideas entirely. He could still be connected to Lewis in some way. Expanding on the idea that the merchant is connected to Los Illuminados, is it too far-fetched to consider that the merchant had all of this planned out from the very start, assisting in Ashley's kidnapping to use Leon for money and aid in Sadler's military expansion and research? Let's go through the evidence. Going back to the lake for a second, Leon logically questions the amount of military-grade weapons and artillery shells that surrounds his workshop. The only other place we'd see something like this is on the island, of course, so either the merchant made these weapons in his workshop or Sadler outsourced them here, which wouldn't make sense as we cannot buy them. There's no elephants roaming around for him to hunt. The merchant would never use these himself, so what's the reason? Possibly this could just be a collection that he stole from the island. His quick speed and shrouded identity would enable this. His expansive knowledge and fondness of guns make this sub-theory more plausible, at one point declaring himself an avid gun collector when we purchased the Red 9.
Ah, a choice of an avid gun collector. It's a nice gun, stranger.
This could just be a sales tactic, of course. He does this with almost every gun, but it's still heavily implied. The merchant is also quite intrusive on a few occasions. He listens to Leon's entire conversation with Lewis while they were tied up, and the preceding radio call with Hunnigan after breaking free, using this information to facilitate his writing of the anonymous letter, a point that I've made before. From this, he learnt about Ashley's name, our mission, Lewis's full name if he didn't know that already, and the secret passage leading to the church. Coincidentally, the very next merchant encounter is exactly where Leon told him to go. If the merchant really did plan all this out, then why didn't he eventually kill Leon after taking most of his money? Especially after the deaths of Mendez and Salazar. We all know that Sadler let Leon live countless times. He seemed to enjoy watching Leon chase after him while he continued killing his friends or kidnapping Ashley over and over again. Even when it got too far, he just didn't kill Leon when he had every chance to. As early as the very first chapter, Mendez lets Leon live under Sadler's instruction, and the corresponding letter is found in the next chapter, which demonstrates, in text, Sadler's perceived foolishness. Mendez was 100% correct to assume that Leon could become a danger if left alive. Bear in mind, this was only the first of around 10 clear opportunities to take Leon out for good. As instructed by Lord Sadler, I have the agent in confinement. Alive. Why keep him alive? I do not fully understand what the Lord's intentions are. He spends the rest of the letter trying to excuse Sadler's idiotic decision-making, but ultimately he trusts his judgment without caution, thus leading to his death in Chapter 2. But what does the merchant have to do with all of this? Well, we know that the merchant is infected and immune to Sadler's call. When we throw in the resurrection and teleportation abilities, he's probably infected with the dominant species Las Plagas. The only other people who are infected with this are Mendez, Salazar, and Krauser. And with the exception of the merchant, all of them are dead by the end of the game. But like all of these people, the merchant doesn't kill Leon unless instructed, which doesn't happen since Sadler doesn't want Leon to die. You can shoot him in the face, show up at his next shop, and he'll forgive you. Just like Sadler, you can kill his best soldiers and half of the Los Luminados population, and he'll just crack jokes without a care in the world.
Enjoy the reunion with your old friend?
As a matter of fact, I did.
Wonderful. I wouldn't want my special guests on the island feeling unattended.
Guess I'm supposed to thank you, right?
Ah, I have an idea. Since you're here, why don't I introduce you to it? It should keep you busy.
Can't remember the name, huh? A senior moment, perhaps.
Oh.
The merchant's actions towards Leon throughout the story show that Sadler had some sort of influence on him. He needed someone for Leon to trust and create a false sense of hope with, but the goal was always to make some money while playing a game. I've noticed that the merchant can even see through walls. Maybe his eyes aren't actually eyes at all. Maybe he's not even infected in the first place. It could just be contact lenses that he wears at night as a safety mechanism in case he runs into a ganado while out hunting or whatever. When combined with his immaculate hearing, he could be hiding a mechanism under his coat. With the technology available at the island, I think this is possible. Much more disturbing things are encountered there. This theory is quite upsetting to hear. To think that the merchant had any exterior motives besides his charming and down-to-earth persona presented to us is weird. I don't believe it myself. There's a lot more points that I could go over, but they just don't seem correct. As interesting the idea is, I like to believe that the merchant really is an avid gun collector. He just so happened to be a long-lost member of Los Luminados. Now, after witnessing the atrocities that Sadler and his subordinates have committed, he's removed himself from that former lifestyle, choosing to live out by this beautiful lake in his old age. Wait a minute, which boat was his again? From analysing every detail this far, I propose a small theory at the end as my conclusion. A theory that would explain his location, his accent, and his character. Because of the merchant's voice, he would have travelled from abroad to settle down in this oddly specific and convenient lakeside cavern, or as Leon calls it.
That's the ultimate reason I'm in this lonely and rural part of Europe.
This setting has little significance on its own, so we need to focus specifically at the lake. Okay, so before Los Illuminados was re-established, Valdelobos was culturally isolated from the rest of Spain, as mentioned earlier. These people lived traditionalist lifestyles and would have shunned tourists such as the merchant. Only after Los Illuminados were formed did they create a monster so frightening that it raised the attention of the fearless trophy fisherman, the merchant. Think about it for a second, there had to have been something about the lake specifically that lured the merchant to it. Legends of such an animal would have been uttered among the sailor community, beckoning the merchant to Spain in the hopes of capturing it. This is very clearly the merchant's boat. There's a cutscene at the cliff face where two ganados use another boat to dispose of the police officer. This one doesn't have the harpoons, and they travel in a different direction from the boat at the dock. This is a cool detail I found. These two villagers are encountered again later. I didn't know they were the same people, but it's obvious. They're the closest two ganados from this cutscene and the exact same character models. The boat that Leon used to kill Delago was 100% the merchant's boat, and he most likely built these harpoons with intent to kill Delago before becoming a friend of Sadler. Noticing his fine craftsmanship, he appointed him as an arms dealer and gunsmith, responsible for the creation of this heavy artillery and most of the business transactions between the island and the village. This is why he was granted the dominant species Las Plagas, as his skills made him a valuable asset to Sadler. I think this is a likely backstory for him. The sailor imagery has also been reused to a greater extent in the remake, confirming that the merchant was always a fisherman, a person who travelled across the world collecting fish, or salamanders in this case, and although he could never kill Delago himself, he will gladly buy the next biggest fish from Leon as compensation. So what can we say about the merchant? I think that he's a legendary figure in Resident Evil, and is Leon's only surviving friend in the end. And with all of the questions about his presence, trying to dig deeper into a mystery that only brings us around in circles, I think the origin of the merchant is a secret better left unanswered.